The sun hung mercilessly over the Dakota Territory, its rays beating down on the dusty main street of Cedar Ridge. It was the summer of 1883, and the small frontier town baked under a cloudless sky. Tumbleweeds rolled past the weathered storefronts, and the air shimmered with heat that made even the hardiest souls seek shade. Inside the modest boarding house at the edge of town, Eleanor May Thornton sat before a cracked mirror, her trembling fingers tracing the raised ridge of scar tissue that ran from her left temple down to her jaw. The mark had healed months ago, but the memory of that terrible night when the barn fire claimed more than just timber remained fresh. She had rushed in to save the horses, and though she'd succeeded, the falling beam had stolen something precious, the beauty that once made young men tip their hats and mothers whisper about good matches. "Eleanor, stop your dawdling." Her mother's sharp voice cut through her thoughts. "Mr. Harrington will be here within the hour." Eleanor's stomach churned. Samuel Harrington, the wealthy cattle baron who owned the largest ranch for 50 miles in any direction. A man old enough to be her father, with cold gray eyes and hands that had never known a day's honest labor. But he had money, and her family needed it desperately after her father's death left them with nothing but debts and dashed dreams. She pulled the white dress over her head, the fabric rough against her skin. It had been her mother's wedding dress, hastily altered to fit her slimmer frame. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her mother had married for love, while Eleanor was being sold like cattle at auction. The main room of the boarding house had been transformed for the occasion. Wildflowers wilted in mason jars, and borrowed chairs lined the walls. The few guests who had arrived early sat in uncomfortable silence, their eyes following Eleanor as she entered. She heard the whispers, felt the weight of their stares. "Poor thing," Mrs. Henderson murmured to her companion. "Such a shame about her face. She was quite the beauty before." "Harrington must be desperate for a young wife," came the reply. "Though I suppose damaged goods are better than no goods at all." Eleanor kept her chin high, though each word struck like a physical blow. She took her place near the window, where Reverend Morrison waited with his worn Bible. The room filled slowly, ranchers in their Sunday best, their wives in calico dresses, all come to witness what everyone privately called a business transaction. Samuel Harrington arrived precisely at noon, his silver pocket watch glinting as he checked the time. He wore a black suit that emphasized his substantial girth, and his pale face showed no emotion as he took his place beside Eleanor. He didn't look at her, hadn't looked at her properly since that first meeting when her mother had desperately negotiated this arrangement. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Morrison began, his voice heavy with forced cheer, "we gather here today to witness the union of Samuel Harrington and Eleanor May Thornton." The words washed over Eleanor like distant thunder. She stared at a knot in the wooden floor, counting the rings within it, one for each year of her life. Perhaps 22 rings, 22 years that had led to this moment of complete surrender. When the Reverend asked for the rings, Harrington produced a simple gold band, not the delicate filigree his first wife had worn. Eleanor noted, this was plain, practical, like everything else about this arrangement. "Do you, Samuel Harrington, take this woman?" "I do." His response was curt, businesslike. "Do you, Eleanor May Thornton, take this man?" The silence stretched. Eleanor felt every eye in the room upon her. Her mother's fingers dug into her arm from where she stood beside her. Eleanor's voice cracked. She cleared her throat. "I do. Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Dakota, I now pronounce you—" "Wait." The word cut through the ceremony like a gunshot. Harrington had turned to face Eleanor fully for the first time, his gray eyes traveling slowly over her face. His expression shifted from indifference to something else, disgust, perhaps, or simple disappointment. "I can't," he said simply. "I thought I could overlook it, but—" He gestured vaguely at her face. "This isn't what I agreed to. Her mother promised me a bride, not a curiosity." The room erupted. Women gasped, men shifted uncomfortably, and Eleanor's mother began pleading in a voice high with panic. "Mr. Harrington, please, we had an arrangement. You've already paid." "Then I'll expect my money returned." He straightened his vest. "I have a reputation to maintain. What would people say, seeing me with that on my arm at social functions?" He turned on his heel and strode toward the door, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. His departure seemed to give others permission to voice what they'd been thinking all along. Did you see how he looked at her? The poor creature, left at the altar. Perhaps it's for the best. Can you imagine the children? Eleanor stood frozen, the white dress suddenly feeling like a shroud. The Reverend closed his Bible with a soft thud that sounded like finality. One by one, the guests filed out, some pausing to pat her mother's shoulder in sympathy, none addressing Eleanor directly. The laughter came last, drifting in through the open door. Young cowboys who'd gathered outside to watch the spectacle, their cruel mirth carrying on the hot wind. A bride cast aside on her wedding day. Someone said, "Mark my words, she'll die a spinster now. No man would have her after this humiliation." Eleanor finally moved, walking slowly to the window. Outside, Cedar Ridge continued its harsh existence under the burning sun. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried, and the sound matched the keening in her own heart. She had thought herself prepared for a loveless marriage, but she hadn't been prepared for this, to be deemed too damaged even for a business arrangement, too scarred to be worth even the price her mother had negotiated. The wedding dress pooled around her feet as she sank to the floor, and for the first time since the fire that had marked her, Eleanor May Thornton allowed herself to weep. Not for the loss of Samuel Harrington, she had never wanted him anyway, but for the final, brutal confirmation of what she had feared since that night in the burning barn. She was no longer a woman in the eyes of this harsh frontier society. She was merely a cautionary tale, a reminder that beauty was currency, and without it, a woman had no value at all. Outside, the sun continued its relentless journey across the sky, and Cedar Ridge settled back into its dusty routine, having witnessed another small tragedy in a land that seemed to specialize in them. The Harrington Ranch sprawled across the horizon like a small kingdom, its white-painted main house rising from the prairie like a monument to prosperity. Eleanor stood at the gate, still wearing her wedding dress, now dusty from the long walk. Her mother had insisted she go there, had pushed and pleaded until Eleanor had no strength left to resist. "You're his wife in the eyes of God," her mother had said. "Make him honor his commitment." But when old Joseph, the ranch foreman, saw her approaching, his weathered face crumpled with pity. "Miss Eleanor," he said, "not Mrs. Harrington." And that told her everything. "Mr. Harrington left word. You're not, that is, he doesn't—" "I understand," Eleanor said quietly, saving him from having to speak the cruel words. Margaret Harrington, Samuel's sister who managed the household, emerged from the house, a woman carved from prairie wind and disappointment. She looked at Eleanor with undisguised contempt. "You have a nerve coming here," she said. "My brother was quite clear. The arrangement is dissolved. You are not welcome on Harrington land. But the money will be collected from your mother promptly. Now leave, before I have the hands escort you off." Eleanor turned away, her feet already blistered in the delicate wedding slippers. Behind her, she heard Margaret's voice carry on the wind. "Bad luck, that one, marked by misfortune. We're well rid of her." The walk back to town seemed endless. The sun had begun its descent, painting the grasslands in shades of gold and crimson. Eleanor removed her slippers, walking barefoot through the buffalo grass. Each step took her further from the life she'd never wanted but now couldn't have, a cruel irony that made her laugh bitterly. When she reached her mother's boarding house, she found chaos. Her mother, Frances Thornton, was pacing the main room, wringing her hands. Beside her stood Mr. Garrett, the bank manager, his face stern. 60 days, he was saying. "That's all I can give you, without the Harrington money." He trailed off when he saw Eleanor, His expression shifted from businesslike to uncomfortable, the look of a man who'd heard all about the morning spectacle. "I'll take my leave," he said hastily. 60 days, Mrs. Thornton. Not a day more. When he'd gone, Frances rounded on her daughter. "This is what you've done to us. Couldn't you have hidden it better? Worn a veil? Something?" He saw my face eventually. "Mother, what did you expect?" "I expected you to secure our future." Frances collapsed into a chair, suddenly looking far older than her years. "Your father left us nothing but debts. You were our only hope, and now we'll be turned out homeless." "Is that what you wanted?" Eleanor felt the weight of guilt settling on her shoulders like a yoke. She hadn't asked for the fire, hadn't asked for the scar, but somehow it had become her fault, her failure. "I'll find work," she said. "Perhaps in the general store, or—" Frances laughed bitterly. "Who would hire you? You're a scandal now. The bride who was rejected at the altar. Damaged goods twice over." The words hung in the air between them like a curse. Eleanor turned and climbed the narrow stairs to her room, soon to be someone else's room. She peeled off the wedding dress, leaving it in a heap on the floor. In her simple calico work dress, she felt more herself, though she wondered who that self was now. The next days passed in a blur of humiliation. Eleanor ventured into town seeking employment, but every door closed before she could properly knock. Mrs. Patterson at the general store took one look at her and shook her head. "I'm sorry, dear, but my customers—" "They talk, you understand. It would be bad for business. The seamstress, the bakery, even the laundry, all full up, no positions available. So sorry to hear about your troubles." Only the saloon owner showed any interest, and his leering suggestion made Eleanor flee before he could finish his proposal. By the end of the week, Eleanor had exhausted every possibility in Cedar Ridge. She stood at the edge of town, looking out at the vast prairie. The grassland stretched endlessly, broken only by the occasional butte or scraggly cottonwood. She'd walked here as a child with her father, when he'd pointed out the different grasses, the hidden springs, the paths the antelope took. "The prairie provides," he'd told her once, "if you know how to look." But what could the prairie provide for a scarred woman with no prospects and no home? She walked without destination, following a dry creek bed. The sun beat down mercilessly, and she'd forgotten to bring water. Her throat burned, but she kept walking, as if she could somehow outdistance her fate. The buzzards appeared around midday, circling lazily overhead. Eleanor watched them with detached interest. They were patient creatures, willing to wait for what the harsh land would eventually provide. She wondered if they were waiting for her. By late afternoon, her strength began to fail. She'd reached a barren stretch where even the hardy prairie grass struggled to grow. The ground was cracked and dusty, like broken promises. Eleanor sank to her knees, then sat, drawing her legs up to her chest. This was where they'd find her, she thought. Another casualty of the frontier, another woman broken by circumstances beyond her control. The buzzards would pick her bones clean, and Cedar Ridge would have a new cautionary tale to whisper about. She closed her eyes, feeling the sun burn against her scarred cheek. In the distance, she could hear something. Hoofbeats, perhaps, or maybe just the wind playing tricks. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered anymore. The prairie had always been honest with her. At least, it didn't care about her scar or her scandal. It would take her just as readily as it had taken countless others who'd ventured too far from civilization's narrow boundaries. "Dust to dust," she whispered, tasting the bitter irony. She'd been cast aside by society, by family, by God himself, it seemed. Now only the endless grass remained to witness her final act of surrender. The hoofbeats grew louder, but Eleanor didn't open her eyes. Let whoever it was pass by. She was beyond caring, beyond shame, beyond everything but the simple desire to rest. The shadow that fell across her was almost a mercy, blocking the relentless sun. She waited for it to pass, for the rider to continue on their way. Instead, she heard the creak of leather as someone dismounted, the soft thud of boots on hard earth. Miss "Miss, are you all right?" The voice was deep, colored by concern. Eleanor finally opened her eyes, squinting up at the silhouette above her. The man knelt beside her, and she caught a glimpse of sun-weathered features, dark eyes that held something she hadn't seen in so long she'd almost forgotten it existed, simple human kindness. But even kindness couldn't save her now. She was a burden, damaged goods, a scandal in a white dress. She closed her eyes again, willing the stranger to leave her to the prairie's judgment. The last thing she remembered was strong arms lifting her, the scent of leather and horse and honest sweat, and a voice saying words she couldn't quite make out over the rushing in her ears. Then darkness took her, and Eleanor May Thornton let it, hoping it would be kinder than the light had been. Water touched her lips, cool and sweet. Eleanor's eyes fluttered open to find herself propped against a saddle, the vast prairie sky darkening above. The stranger knelt beside her, holding a canteen steady as she drank. "Easy now," he said, "small sips." In the fading light, she could see him clearly. He was perhaps 30 years old, with sun-darkened skin that spoke of countless days under the open sky. His face was angular, marked by weather and work, with deep brown eyes that held no judgment. Black hair fell past his collar, and his clothes, worn denim and leather, bore the dust of long travels. "Name's Jake Morrison," he said, settling back on his heels. "Found you half dead out here. What were you thinking? Walking the prairie without water?" Eleanor touched her scarred cheek instinctively, turning her face away. "I wasn't thinking," she admitted. Perhaps that was the point. He studied her for a long moment, then reached into his saddlebags and produced a piece of hardtack and some dried beef. "Eat," he said simply. "Won't do any good to survive the heat just to starve." She took the food mechanically, expecting him to ask about the scar, about what a woman was doing alone in the wasteland. Instead, he busied himself building a small fire from buffalo chips and dried grass, working with the easy efficiency of someone who'd made camp 1,000 times. "You from Cedar Ridge?" he asked eventually. "Not looking up from the fire. I was—" The past tense came naturally. She had no home there now. "Planning to go back?" Eleanor laughed, a bitter sound that made him glance up. "There's nothing for me there. I have nowhere to go." Jake nodded as if this made perfect sense. He pulled a battered coffee pot from his pack and set it on the fire. "I know the feeling. Been drifting myself since the war ended. Sometimes nowhere is the only honest place left." They sat in silence as the coffee brewed, the stars emerging one by one overhead. Eleanor found herself stealing glances at him, this strange man who'd saved her life without asking for explanation or offering pity. His hands were scarred from rope burns, his movements those of someone who worked with horses and cattle. "You a cowboy?" she asked. "When there's work. Been driving cattle up from Texas, working the ranches between, just finished a drive to Montana, heading back south now, looking for winter work." He poured coffee into 2 tin cups, handing her one. It was strong and bitter, but it warmed her from the inside. "I should thank you," Eleanor said, "for stopping. Most wouldn't have. Most are fools then." He sipped his coffee, eyes on the fire. Prairie's hard enough without people being cruel to each other. The simple truth of it made her throat tight. She turned her scarred side toward him deliberately, watching for the flinch, the look of disgust she'd grown accustomed to. Instead, he glanced at her face with the same mild interest he might show a sunset or a distant mountain, acknowledging it without judgment. "Fire?" he asked. She nodded, surprised by his matter-of-fact tone. "Barn fire. I went in for the horses. Brave thing to do. Foolish. According to most. It cost me." She trailed off, unsure how to explain all it had cost. "Your pretty face?" Jake shrugged. "Pretty's just one thing a person can be. Plenty of pretty people I wouldn't trust to water my horse. You saved those animals. That tells me more about you than any face could." Eleanor stared at him, this weathered stranger who spoke so simply of things that had destroyed her life. "You don't understand. I was to be married. But when the groom saw me clearly, He walked away, at the altar, in front of everyone. Then he was a damn fool. Jake's voice held quiet anger. Man who'd judge a woman by a scar ain't worth the dirt on your shoes. Easy for you to say. You're not a woman. You don't know what it means to be damaged. Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then he unbuttoned his shirt halfway, pulling it aside to reveal a mass of scar tissue across his chest and shoulder. Confederate grape shot at Antietam, he said. Spent 3 months dying in a field hospital, then another year wishing I had. Every person I'd known before looked at me different after, like I was broken. Maybe I was. He buttoned his shirt again. But broken things can still be useful, still be good. Just takes finding people who can see past the damage. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. And if there are no such people, then you make your own way, build your own life. He gestured at the vast darkness around them. Plenty of room out here for folks who don't fit the mold. They talked through the night, sharing stories while the fire burned low. Jake told her about cattle drives, about storms that could kill a man in minutes, and sunsets so beautiful they made you believe in God again. He spoke of Mexican vaqueros who'd taught him to rope, of Indian tribes who'd traded with him, of the changing frontier that was slowly being fenced and civilized. Eleanor found herself telling him things she'd never spoken aloud. Her dreams before the fire, her father's death, the suffocating expectations of a woman in a small town. He listened without interrupting, occasionally adding wood to the fire. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold, Jake stood and stretched. I'm heading to the Rocking J Ranch, about 30 miles south. They always need help with cooking and keeping house, especially now that winter's coming. Pays fair, and the foreman's a decent sort. Eleanor's heart sank. Of course he would leave. Why had she expected anything different? Thing is, he continued, not looking at her, it's hard travel alone. Could use someone to share the watch, help with the horses, if you've got nowhere particular to be. She stared at him. You're offering to take me with you? You don't even know me. Know enough. He began saddling his horse, a bay gelding that stood patiently. You're brave enough to run into a fire, strong enough to survive what came after. That's recommendation enough for me. People will talk. A woman traveling with a man who's not her husband. People always talk. Question is whether you're going to live your life by their words or your own choices. Eleanor stood slowly, her legs stiff from the night on hard ground. The morning sun caught her scarred cheek, warming it, for the first time since the fire. She didn't turn away from the light. I don't have a horse, she said. Jake smiled then, the expression transforming his serious face. Lucky for you, I picked up a spare in Montana. Gentle mare, need someone with soft hands. He whistled, and a brown mare with a white blaze trotted over from where she'd been grazing. What do you say, Miss Thornton? Eleanor Thornton. She took a deep breath, feeling as if she stood at the edge of a cliff. And yes, I'll come with you. As Jake helped her mount the mare, his hands were steady and impersonal. He adjusted the stirrups, showed her how to hold the reins, then swung up onto his own horse with easy grace. One thing, he said as they prepared to ride. Out here, nobody cares about your past unless you give them reason to. You're not the rejected bride or the scarred woman or whatever else they called you. You're just Eleanor, riding south toward winter work. That enough for you? Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she'd carried so long she'd forgotten it was there. More than enough, she said. They rode into the rising sun, two figures against the vast canvas of prairie grass. Behind them, Eleanor's old life grew smaller with each hoofbeat. Ahead, the trail stretched toward possibilities she'd never dared imagine. And beside her rode a man who saw her not as damaged goods, but simply as another soul trying to find their way in a hard world. For the first time in months, Eleanor May Thornton smiled. The scar pulled at her cheek, but she didn't care. She was riding toward something new, and that was worth more than all the pretty faces in the world. The rocking J Ranch emerged from the prairie like a small town unto itself. Wooden buildings clustered around a main house, smoke rising from multiple chimneys. Corrals held dozens of horses, and in the distance, Eleanor could see the dark mass of cattle spreading across the grassland. Jake led them through the main gate, where a stocky man with graying whiskers stood waiting. "Morrison, about time you showed up. We've got—" He stopped, noticing Eleanor. His eyes flickered to her scar, then away, settling on Jake with a question. "This is Miss Eleanor Thornton," Jake said easily. "Met her on the trail. She's looking for work, and I remembered you saying Mrs. Collins could use help in the kitchen." The foreman, Tom Bradley. He introduced himself, studied Eleanor with shrewd eyes. "Can you cook?" "Yes, sir, and bake, preserve, mend, tend gardens, whatever's needed. We start before dawn, work till after dark, pays $20 a month plus board, no drinking, no trouble, no, entertaining the men. That acceptable?" Eleanor's cheeks burned at the implication, but she kept her voice steady. "More than acceptable. Mr. Bradley." He nodded. "Mrs. Collins is in the kitchen. Jake'll show you the way." As they turned to go, he added, "Miss Thornton, we judge folks by their work here, nothing else. Do your job well, and you'll have no trouble from anyone." The kitchen building sat separate from the main house, connected by a covered walkway. Inside, Eleanor found organized chaos. A woman in her 50s, gray hair pinned severely back, stood over a massive stove stirring multiple pots while bread baked in the ovens. "Mrs. Collins," Jake said. "Tom sent us. This is Eleanor Thornton. Come to help with the work." The woman turned, her face flushed from the heat. She took in Eleanor's appearance with one comprehensive glance, her expression softening slightly. "About blessed time. I've been managing alone for 3 weeks since that worthless Amy ran off with a traveling salesman." She wiped her hands on her apron. "Can you start now? Supper for 30 men doesn't cook itself." Jake touched Eleanor's elbow lightly. "I'll get your things settled in the women's quarters. You'll do fine." Then he was gone, leaving Eleanor in the steamy kitchen with Mrs. Collins's expectant gaze upon her. "Well," the older woman said, "there's aprons on the hook, potatoes need peeling, beans need sorting, and I need another pair of hands on this stew before it burns." Eleanor tied on an apron and set to work. The familiar rhythm of kitchen tasks, peeling, chopping, stirring, settled her nerves. Mrs. Collins worked mostly in silence, occasionally barking instructions, but there was no malice in it, only efficiency. As the sun set, cowboys began filtering in for supper. They were a rough bunch, sun-darkened, dust-covered, smelling of horses and hard work. Eleanor kept her head down, ladling stew and slicing bread, but she felt their curious glances. "Who's the new girl?" "Mrs. C," one asked. "Miss Thornton, and you'll address her respectfully or eat your meals with the horses." "Mrs." Collins replied sharply. After the men had eaten and gone, Eleanor and Mrs. Collins sat at the small table in the kitchen, sharing their own meal. The older woman studied her thoughtfully. "Jake Morrison brought you in?" "He found me on the prairie. I was in some difficulty. He offered to help me find work." "That sounds like Jake. Good man, though he keeps to himself mostly." Mrs. Collins paused. "I won't ask your story. We all have them out here. But I'll tell you plain, you work hard, keep your nose clean, and this can be a good place. Some of the men might stare or whisper, but Tom Bradley runs a tight ship. Anyone bothers you, you tell me or him." The women's quarters were simple but clean, a small building with 4 rooms. Eleanor's was barely large enough for a bed and washstand, but it had a window looking out over the prairie, and it was hers. Days settled into routine. Up before dawn to start breakfast, flapjacks, biscuits, salt pork, coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe, then preparations for the midday meal, delivered to the men wherever they worked. Afternoons meant starting supper, mending, maintaining the vegetable garden behind the kitchen. Jake she saw only occasionally. He worked with the horses mostly, breaking new mounts and training cutting horses for cattle work. Sometimes she'd catch glimpses of him in the corral, moving with that easy grace she'd noticed on the trail. When their paths crossed, he'd tip his hat and ask how she was settling in. Nothing more. One evening, perhaps 2 weeks after her arrival, Eleanor was hanging laundry when she heard music. Following the sound, she found several cowboys gathered around the bunkhouse, one playing a battered fiddle. Jake sat on the steps, whittling a piece of wood. "Miss Eleanor," called out Will Hutchins, the youngest of the hands, "come join us. Sam's fixing to play some dancing tunes." She hesitated, aware of the risk. A woman among men, even in innocent circumstances, invited talk. But the music was sweet, the evening air cool after the day's heat, and she was tired of hiding. She perched on a barrel near the edge of the gathering, smoothing her skirts. Sam launched into a lively reel, and some of the men began to clap along. One or two even danced together, playing the woman's part with exaggerated movements that had everyone laughing. "You know Red River Valley?" Jake asked the fiddler. Sam nodded and began the slower, melancholy tune. Jake's voice, when he sang, was surprisingly good. A clear baritone that carried across the yard. "From this valley they say you are going. We will miss your bright eyes and sweet smile." Others joined in, their rough voices blending in the twilight. Eleanor found herself humming along, remembering her father singing this same song. When the music ended, Jake was watching her. "You should sing next time," he said. "Bet you have a nice voice." Before she could respond, Tom Bradley appeared. "Morrison, need to talk to you about that string of mustangs spotted near Devil's Canyon." Jake stood, but before leaving, he pressed something into Eleanor's hand. "Made this for you," he said quietly. "Thought you might like it." She looked down to find a small wooden flower, delicately carved with each petal distinct. It was beautiful work, patient and careful. "Why?" she asked. But he was already walking away with Bradley. That night, Eleanor placed the wooden flower on her windowsill where the morning light would find it. She traced its petals, wondering at this man who saw beauty worth creating even in hard wood and scarred women. The next morning brought trouble. A group of men rode in, friends of Samuel Harrington, by their talk. They'd come to buy horses but spent more time gossiping about affairs in Cedar Ridge. "Heard old Sam finally found himself a bride," one said over breakfast. "Some young thing from back east. Pretty as a picture, they say. Better than that scarred creature he almost got stuck with." Another laughed. "Can you imagine? Heard she went mad after he rejected her. Wandered off into the prairie to die." Eleanor's hands trembled as she poured coffee, but she kept her face neutral. "Mrs." Collins shot her a concerned glance. "Seems to me," Jake's voice cut through the laughter, "men who gossip like old women got too much time on their hands." The speaker turned, his face reddening. "Was I talking to you, Cowboy?" "No, but I'm talking to you." Jake stood slowly, his hand resting casually near his pistol. "This is a working ranch. We've got no time for idle talk about folks who aren't here to defend themselves." The tension stretched taut before Bradley intervened. "Jake's right. You boys came to buy horses, not spread tales. Let's get to business." After they'd gone to the corrals, Mrs. Collins patted Eleanor's shoulder. "Pay them no mind. Fools and their opinions aren't worth spit." But Eleanor couldn't forget their words. That night, she sat by her window, holding the wooden flower. Below, she could see Jake by the corral, brushing down his horse in the moonlight. He worked with the same patient care he'd shown in carving the flower, gentle despite his strength. She thought about his scarred chest, hidden beneath his shirt, about how he'd shown her without shame, as if to say, "We're alike, you and I, marked by life but not defeated by it." A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Collins stood there with a cup of tea. "Thought you might need this," she said, settling her bulk on the bed. "Those men today, Their words cut you." Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. "I've been out here 20 years. Mrs., Collins said, came after my husband died, left me with nothing but debts. People said a widow should remarry quick or go back east to family. Instead, I came here, made my own way. It wasn't easy, and plenty of folks had opinions about it, but you know what I learned." She sipped her tea thoughtfully. "The frontier's got room for all sorts, those who fit the mold and those who don't. What matters is what you do with your chances, not what others say about them." After she left, Eleanor returned to the window. Jake was gone, but a light burned in the bunkhouse. Through the window, she could see him at the table, carving another piece of wood. His hands moved surely, creating something beautiful from raw material. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges. But tonight, holding a wooden flower carved by patient hands, Eleanor felt something she hadn't in months, the fragile bloom of hope. Word travels fast on the frontier, faster than tumbleweeds in a dust storm. Within a month of Eleanor's arrival at the Rocking J, the whispers had found her again. It started with a supply run to the nearest town. Eleanor had accompanied Mrs. Collins to help with purchasing, and at the general store, she'd overheard two women talking. "That's her," one hissed. "The scarred bride from Cedar Ridge, living with all those men at the Rocking J now." "Shameful," the other replied. "No decent woman would put herself in such a position." Eleanor kept her head high, focusing on selecting flour and coffee. But the words burrowed deep. By the time they returned to the ranch, the gossip had somehow arrived before them. Some of the newer hands started looking at her differently. Where before there had been respectful distance, now she caught leering glances, heard whispered suggestions. One evening, a cowboy named Dale Garrett cornered her near the chicken coop. "Heard all about you," he said, breath sour with whiskey. "Woman who's already ruined, got nothing left to lose. Right?" Before Eleanor could respond, Jake appeared from nowhere, his fist connecting with Garrett's jaw. The man went down hard, and Jake stood over him, deadly quiet. "Get your gear and get out," he said. "You're done here." Garrett scrambled up, spitting blood. "Over some scarred?" Jake's hand went to his gun. "Finish that sentence, please." The man fled, but the damage was done. The other hands kept their distance from Eleanor now. Some from respect for Jake's protection, others from fear of association with scandal. "Mrs." Collins tried to comfort her. "It'll pass, dear. These things always do." But it didn't pass. It grew worse. Someone, Eleanor never learned who, sent word to Cedar Ridge about where she was living. The response came in the form of her mother, arriving in a hired buggy with Frances Thornton's particular gift for dramatic entrance. "Eleanor May!" she cried, stepping down in her best black dress, the one she'd worn to Father's funeral. "Living in sin among rough men. Have you no shame left at all?" The entire ranch seemed to stop work to witness the scene. Cowboys peered from barn doors and corral fences as Frances marched toward the kitchen, where Eleanor stood frozen. "Mother, please!" "Don't you mother me. Bad enough you cost us the Harrington money, bad enough you became the laughingstock of Cedar Ridge. But this degradation?" Jake materialized. He had a way of doing that when Eleanor needed help. "Ma'am, your daughter works here honest. She's under Mrs. Collins's supervision and Mr. Bradley's protection. Nothing improper." "And who are you?" Frances's eyes narrowed. "Another of her admirers? Look at her face. Young man, she's marked, ruined. No decent man would—" "That's enough." Jake's voice could have cut glass. "You've said your piece. Now leave. She's my daughter." "No." Eleanor found her voice at last. "No, I'm not. Not anymore. A daughter wouldn't be a burden, a disappointment, damaged goods to be sold. I'm nothing to you but a failed investment." Frances's face went white, then red. "Then you're no daughter of mine. When you end up truly ruined, bearing some cowboy's bastard child, don't come crawling home." She swept back to her buggy, leaving devastation in her wake. The ranch hands dispersed slowly. avoiding Eleanor's eyes. She stood trembling until Mrs. Collins led her inside. That night, Eleanor didn't appear for supper service. Mrs. Collins, understanding, managed alone. Eleanor sat in her small room, staring at the wooden flower on her windowsill, wondering if it was time to move on again. Always moving, always running from the whispers that followed like wolves. A knock interrupted her thoughts. She expected Mrs. Collins, but it was Jake, hat in hand. "Walk with me," he asked. She shouldn't. The gossip was bad enough already, but something in his eyes made her reach for her shawl. They walked beyond the ranch buildings to a small rise overlooking the valley. The sun was setting, painting the grasslands gold and crimson. Jake spread a blanket and gestured for her to sit. "Your mother was wrong," he said without preamble. "About everything, but especially about decent men." Eleanor laughed bitterly. "Was she? Look around. Jake, the gossip, the assumptions. Maybe they're all right. Maybe I am ruined." "You saved horses from a fire. You work honest. You treat folks with kindness even when they don't deserve it." He turned to face her fully. "That's not ruin. That's character. Character doesn't keep the whispers away." "No," he agreed. "Nothing does that but time and distance, or finding someone who stands with you against them." She looked at him then, really looked, saw the way he watched her, not with pity or desire, but with something deeper. "Why do you care? Why did you help me that day on the prairie?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. "My mother was Comanche," he said finally. "Father was a trader. Took her to wife proper, but folks never saw it that way. After she died, I grew up hearing the whispers. Half-breed, savage. Not white enough for town, not Indian enough for the tribe." He pulled up a grass stem, twirling it between his fingers. "Learned young that other people's opinions could kill you if you let them. Also learned that finding one person who sees you true is worth more than 100 who only see what they expect. And what do you see when you look at me? A woman who runs into burning buildings, who faces down cruel people with dignity, who makes the best biscuits in 3 territories." He smiled slightly. "Someone I'd like to know better. If she'd let me." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "The gossip will get worse if people think, let them think." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His fingers were calloused but gentle. "I've been drifting since the war, looking for something I couldn't name. Then I found you half dead on the prairie, and something in me said, here's what you've been looking for." I can't be what you're looking for. I'm too damaged, too—" "Eleanor." He squeezed her hand. "We're all damaged. Every last soul on this ranch, in this territory. That's why we're here instead of somewhere civilized. The question isn't whether you're scarred. It's whether you'll let those scars define your whole life." She thought of her mother's words, of the whispers in town, of all the voices saying she was ruined, worthless, marked. Then she thought of Jake's wooden flower, carved with patient hands, of Mrs. Collins's steady kindness, of Tom Bradley saying they judged by work, not appearance. "I don't know how to hope anymore," she whispered. "Then don't hope. Just be. Work, eat, sleep, watch the sunsets. Let tomorrow worry about tomorrow." He released her hand and stood, offering to help her up. "And maybe let a broken-down cowboy sit with you sometimes. Share stories. Nothing improper, just 2 people finding their way." As they walked back, Eleanor noticed faces in windows quickly turning away. By morning, everyone would know Jake Morrison had walked out with the scarred woman. The gossip would spread like wildfire. But for now, in the gentle dusk with a good man beside her, Eleanor found she didn't care. The voices that mattered were the ones that spoke kindness. The rest were just noise on the wind. That night, she appeared for late kitchen cleanup, surprising Mrs. Collins. "Thought you'd hidden away for good," the older woman said. "No," Eleanor said, tying on her apron. "I'm done hiding. Let them gossip. I have work to do." Mrs. Collins smiled. "That's my girl? And Jake Morrison? He's worth the talk, if you're asking. Eleanor touched the wooden flower in her pocket. I'm beginning to think so. Outside, she could hear the evening songs starting up, Cowboy's voices rough but harmonious in the darkness. Through the window, she saw Jake on the bunkhouse steps, whittling again. He looked up as if sensing her gaze, touched his hat brim, and returned to his work. Tomorrow would bring more gossip, more challenges. But tonight, Eleanor Thornton was exactly where she belonged, working honest, standing tall, and slowly learning that some things were worth more than the approval of those who'd already judged her. The frontier had room for all sorts. Misses. Collins had said, maybe, just maybe. It had room for a scarred woman learning to hope again, and a patient cowboy willing to wait while she did. The trouble came on a dusty afternoon when the October wind carried hints of coming winter. Eleanor was drawing water from the well when she heard the horses, too many to be ranch hands returning from the range. Samuel Harrington rode at the front of 6 men, his bulk somehow more imposing on horseback. Beside him rode his foreman, Marcus Webb, a man whose reputation for violence preceded him like a shadow. Eleanor's hands tightened on the bucket handle, but she forced herself to stand straight. Running would only make things worse. Well, well, Harrington said, dismounting with surprising grace for his size. The runaway bride. You've caused me considerable embarrassment. Miss Thornton. The name is Miss Thornton, and I've caused you nothing. Eleanor replied. You made your choice. I've made mine. His eyes narrowed. You've made a spectacle of yourself. Living here among these men, my business associates laugh behind my back, saying I was lucky to escape marriage to a... He gestured at her face. A creature who'd turned to such degradation. Jake emerged from the horse barn, moving with deliberate calm, though Eleanor could see the tension in his shoulders. Tom Bradley and several hands followed, spreading out in a loose semicircle. Gentlemen, Bradley said, this is private property. State your business. My business is with her. Harrington jabbed a finger at Eleanor. She owes me for the humiliation she's caused. I want her gone from this territory. She owes you nothing, Jake said quietly. He'd positioned himself between Eleanor and the visitors, casual but ready. Man who walks away from his bride forfeits any claim to her actions. Webb spoke for the first time, his voice like gravel. No one asked you, breed. The slur hung in the air like a challenge. Jake's hand didn't move toward his gun, but something in his stillness made Webb shift uneasily. I'll ask you once to leave, Bradley said. The lady works for me, and she's under my protection. Protection? Harrington laughed. You mean she's spreading her favors among your men? I wonder which one. Jake moved so fast, Eleanor barely saw it. His fist caught Harrington in the mouth, sending the bigger man stumbling back. Webb went for his gun, but found himself looking down the barrel of Jake's Colt, drawn in one fluid motion. Anyone else? Jake asked conversationally. The moment stretched taut. Then Bradley and his men drew their own weapons, the sound of multiple hammers cocking like metallic rain. 6 against 12, Bradley observed. Not good odds. Mr. Harrington, best mount up. Harrington wiped blood from his mouth, his face purple with rage. You'll regret this, all of you. I have influence. Not here. Bradley cut him off. Here, you're just another man who can bleed. Now get. They left, but Eleanor knew it wasn't over. Harrington's pride had been wounded twice now, and such men didn't forget. That evening, Jake found her sitting behind the kitchen, staring at nothing. Without asking, he sat beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth, but not touching. I'm trouble for you, she said. For everyone here. Maybe I should... Don't. His voice was firm. Don't let them drive you off. That's what they want. Why should you care? Why should any of you risk... Jake turned to face her. Because it's right. Because you deserve to make your own way without men like Harrington deciding your fate. Because... He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. Because? She prompted softly. Because I'm falling in love with you. The words hung between them, simple and devastating. Eleanor's hand flew to her scarred cheek. "You can't look at me." "I am looking." He caught her hand, gently pulling it away from her face. "Been looking since that day on the prairie. See a woman with courage, kindness, strength I admire. The scar's just part of you, like my blood's part of me, doesn't define the whole." "Jake." Tears blurred her vision. "I don't know if I'm ready. Not asking you to be, just telling you where I stand." He released her hand but didn't move away. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." Inside the kitchen, Eleanor could hear Mrs. Collins preparing the evening meal. Normal sounds of normal life, continuing despite the day's drama. She thought about running again, finding another town, another ranch, always running from the past, from judgment, from the possibility of pain. Then she looked at Jake, patient, steady Jake who'd shown her his own scars without shame, who saw her true and still chose to stay. "They'll come back," she said. "Harrington won't let this go." "Probably not." Jake shrugged. "But that's tomorrow's trouble. Tonight, we're here, we're safe, and Cook's making her famous pot roast. Seems enough to me." Despite everything, Eleanor found herself smiling. "Is food all you think about?" "Not all," he said with a grin that made her heart skip. "But it's safer than what else I'm thinking." She blushed but didn't look away. For a long moment, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the clouds in shades of rose and gold. "I need to help with supper," Eleanor said finally. "I'll walk you." It was only a few steps to the kitchen door, but Jake made a small ceremony of it, offering his arm like a gentleman escorting a lady to a ball. Eleanor took it, feeling the solid strength beneath the worn cotton shirt. At the door, she paused. "Jake, what you said about falling in love?" "Yeah?" "I'm glad you told me, even if I can't." "Eleanor." He touched her face, his thumb ghosting over the scar with infinite gentleness. "Love's not a debt to be paid. It's a gift freely given. Accept it or not as you choose, but don't feel obligated. That's not love. That's another kind of cage." She caught his hand, pressing it briefly to her cheek before stepping back. "You're a good man, Jake Morrison. Trying to be," he said. "Some days are better than others." Inside, Mrs. Collins took one look at Eleanor's face and smiled knowingly. About time that boy spoke up. "Been mooning over you for weeks." "Mrs. Collins." "What? I've got eyes, haven't I?" The older woman handed her an apron. "Now let's get these hungry men fed. Lord knows they've earned it today." As Eleanor worked, her hands steady with familiar tasks, she found herself stealing glances through the window. Jake was at the corral, checking the horses for the night. The other hands moved around him, preparing for evening with the rhythm of long practice. This was her life now. Not the one she'd planned, certainly not the one her mother had wanted, but hers nonetheless. A life built on work and slowly growing trust, on small kindnesses and unexpected grace. Webb and his men would likely return. Harrington's wounded pride would demand satisfaction. There would be more violence, more danger. But looking at the people who'd stood for her today, Jake, Bradley, Mrs. Collins, even the rough cowboys who'd drawn their guns in her defense, Eleanor felt something she hadn't in months. Not alone. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. The scar on her face pulled as she smiled, ladling stew into bowls. Let it pull. Let people stare. She had work to do, people to feed, a life to build, and maybe, when she was ready, a patient cowboy to love. For now, that was more than enough. It was everything. That night, as she lay in her narrow bed listening to coyotes singing to the moon, Eleanor touched the wooden flower on her nightstand. Tomorrow would bring its troubles, but tonight she was safe, valued, even loved. The scared, scarred bride who'd been cast aside was gone. In her place stood Eleanor Thornton, cook, friend. woman of courage. The transformation wasn't complete, might never be, but it had begun. And that was its own kind of miracle on the unforgiving frontier. The Harvest Festival came to Cedar Ridge every October, when the work of summer was done and winter hadn't yet shown its teeth. For weeks, Mrs. Collins had been planning the Rocking Jay's contribution, preserves to sell, pies to enter in contests, proud evidence of their kitchen's quality. "You should come," she told Eleanor as they packed jars into crates. "Do you good to get off the ranch, see some friendly faces." Eleanor doubted there would be many friendly faces for her in Cedar Ridge, but Mrs. Collins had been kind, and the older woman clearly wanted company for the long wagon ride. Besides, Jake would be there with the other hands, bringing horses to show and possibly sell. The morning of the festival dawned clear and bright. Eleanor wore her best dress, a simple blue calico that brought out her eyes. She'd arranged her dark hair carefully, though no arrangement could hide the scar. Well, let them look. She was done hiding. The wagon ride to town passed pleasantly enough, with Mrs. Collins chatting about festivals past and Jake riding alongside on his bay gelding. Other Rocking Jay hands rode escort, joking and laughing in the crisp autumn air. Cedar Ridge had transformed itself. Bunting hung across Main Street, and booths lined the thoroughfare selling everything from leather goods to candy. The smell of roasting meat and baking pies filled the air, and fiddle music drifted from the dance platform erected near the town hall. Eleanor helped Mrs. Collins set up their booth, arranging jars of preserves and pickles in attractive displays. People walked by, some stopping to purchase, others just to stare. She recognized many faces, former neighbors, people she'd known all her life. Some nodded politely, others turned away, and a few whispered behind their hands, "Eleanor Thornton, as I live and breathe." She turned to find Martha Gibson, once her closest friend, standing with a baby on her hip and her husband by her side. "Martha," Eleanor said carefully, "you look well." Martha's eyes went immediately to the scar, then darted away. "Yes, well, marriage agrees with me." She clutched her husband's arm tighter. "We heard you were... that is, someone said you'd left town. I work at the Rocking Jay now. Kitchen work." "Oh." Martha's face showed a mixture of pity and relief. Pity for Eleanor's reduced circumstances. Relief that her own life had taken a different path. "How nice. We really must be going. Good to see you." They hurried away, leaving Eleanor feeling hollow. This had been a mistake. She should have stayed at the ranch where at least the judgment was honest. "Don't let her trouble you," Mrs. Collins said quietly. "Small minds make small lives." As the day wore on, Eleanor found a rhythm in selling their goods, making change, wrapping purchases. She could almost pretend things were normal until she heard a familiar, unwelcome voice. "Well, if it isn't our local scandal." Samuel Harrington stood before their booth, his new bride on his arm. The girl, she couldn't be more than 17, was indeed pretty as a picture, with golden curls and china blue eyes. She looked at Eleanor with open curiosity. "Mr. Harrington," Eleanor said evenly, "I hope you're enjoying the festival." "Oh, immensely. Allow me to introduce my wife. Clarissa, my dear, this is the unfortunate creature I told you about, the one who tried to trap me into marriage despite her disfigurement." Clarissa giggled, a tinkling sound that grated on Eleanor's nerves. "Oh, Samuel, you do tell the most amusing stories." "Move along, Harrington," Mrs. Collins said sharply. "You're blocking legitimate customers." His face darkened, still hiding behind others. "I see. Tell me, Eleanor, which of those cowboys at the Rocking Jay are you spreading your legs for? Or is it all of them?" The crude words, spoken loudly enough for passers-by to hear, made Eleanor's cheeks burn. Several people stopped to watch, sensing drama. "That's enough." Jake appeared as if from nowhere, placing himself between Eleanor and Harrington. "You've said your piece. Now move on. The breed rises to defend his whore." Harrington sneered. "How touching." Jake's fist moved faster than thought, catching Harrington square in the nose. Blood spurted, staining his white shirt. Clarissa screamed. The crowd pressed closer, eager for spectacle. "Jake, no!" Eleanor caught his arm before he could strike again. "He's not worth it." Harrington dabbed at his nose with a handkerchief, his eyes murderous. "You'll hang for this. Savage. Attacking a respectable citizen in broad daylight." "I saw him trip," Tom Bradley said, pushing through the crowd with several Rocking J hands. "Clumsy fellow, walking into posts. Happens when a man samples too much festival whiskey." "I saw the same," said a familiar voice. Eleanor turned, shocked to see Reverend Morrison. "Mr." Harrington clearly stumbled. "Perhaps you should take your wife home. Samuel, she seems distressed." Faced with multiple witnesses, Harrington had no choice but to retreat, pulling his bewildered bride with him. But his parting look promised retribution. The crowd dispersed slowly, disappointed at the lack of extended violence. Eleanor stood shaking, overwhelmed by the public humiliation and the unexpected support. "Come on," Jake said gently. "Let's get some air." He led her away from the booth, Mrs. Collins waving them on. They walked to the edge of the festival grounds, where a grove of cottonwoods provided shade and relative privacy. "You shouldn't have hit him," Eleanor said. "He'll make trouble for you now." "Let him try." Jake flexed his bruised knuckles. "Man speaks to you like that, he gets what's coming. People will talk more now. Say you're that we're Eleanor." He turned to face her fully. "They're already talking. Been talking since the day I brought you to the ranch. Question is whether we let their words matter more than what's true." "And what's true?" Instead of answering with words, Jake cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. It was gentle but sure, a declaration more powerful than any speech. For a moment, Eleanor forgot the crowd, the gossip, everything but the warmth of his lips and the safety of his arms. Then reality crashed back. They were in public, at the edge of the festival. Anyone could see. Everyone would know. "There," Jake said, pulling back but keeping his hands on her face. "Now they've got something real to talk about." Eleanor stared at him, torn between shock, fear, and a wild urge to laugh. "Jake Morrison, you've lost your mind." "Maybe." He grinned, looking younger and more carefree than she'd ever seen him. "Been wanting to do that for weeks. Figured if Harrington was going to spread lies, might as well make some of them true." "This isn't a joke. Your reputation—" "My reputation's my own to risk." His expression grew serious. "I meant what I said before. I love you. Not going to hide it or pretend otherwise for the sake of people who judge us, no matter what we do." From the festival came the sound of fiddle music starting up again. The dance had begun, couples moving together in the fading afternoon light. Normal people living normal lives. Something Eleanor had thought lost to her forever. "Dance with me," Jake said suddenly. "What? No, I can't." "Sure you can. It's just moving to music with someone you care about." He held out his hand. "Unless you're ashamed to be seen with a half-breed cowboy." She knew he was challenging her, pushing her to choose between fear and life. Looking at his outstretched hand, Eleanor made her decision. She took it. They walked back to the festival together, hands linked, heads high. The dancing platform was crowded, but space appeared as they stepped up. The fiddle player faltered for a moment, then continued with renewed vigor. Jake led her into the dance, one hand on her waist, the other holding hers. He was a surprisingly good dancer, moving with the same easy grace he showed in the saddle. Eleanor followed, letting the music carry her past the stairs and whispers. "Everyone's watching," she murmured. "Let 'em." He spun her, bringing her back close. All they're seeing is a man dancing with a woman he loves. Nothing scandalous in that. Around them, she began to notice something unexpected. Not everyone was staring in judgment. Some couples smiled as they passed. A few of the Rocking J hands whooped approval, even Reverend Morrison. standing with his wife at the platform's edge, nodded approvingly. The dance ended, but Jake didn't release her. Another? Eleanor looked around at the faces, some cruel, some kind, most simply curious. Then she looked at Jake, patient and sure, offering her not just a dance, but a choice about how to live. Yes, she said. Another. They danced until the sun set and lanterns were lit. They danced until her feet hurt and her face ached from smiling. They danced until even the whispers died away, replaced by the simple joy of movement and music under the vast prairie sky. When they finally stopped, Mrs. Collins was waiting with a knowing smile. About time you two stopped circling each other like wary cats. Now, let's get back to the ranch before Mr. Bradley thinks we've all run off to join a traveling show. As they prepared to leave, Eleanor felt a hand on her arm. Martha Gibson stood there, her earlier discomfort replaced by something like wistfulness. You looked happy out there, Martha said softly. Really happy. I'm glad for you. Eleanor? It wasn't an apology for earlier, not quite, but it was something. A crack in the wall that divided the scarred from the whole. The ride back to the rocking J passed in comfortable silence. Eleanor dozed against Mrs. Collins's shoulder, her hand somehow finding Jake's as he rode alongside the wagon. Above them, stars emerged one by one, ancient witnesses to human joy and sorrow alike. Tomorrow would bring consequences. Harrington wouldn't forget the public humiliation. The gossips would have new fuel for their fires. But tonight, Eleanor Thornton had danced in the arms of a man who loved her, scar and all. She'd chosen joy over fear, life over mere existence. The scarred bride had been cast aside, yes, but in her place stood something stronger, a woman who'd found her worth not in others' opinions but in her own choices and the love of those who saw her true. As the rocking J came into view, lanterns glowing warm against the darkness, Eleanor smiled. She was home. The morning after the festival dawned cold and clear, frost silvering the grass like scattered diamonds. Eleanor woke with the memory of Jake's kiss still warm on her lips, but reality intruded quickly. Through her window, she could see riders approaching, too many to be friendly. She dressed hurriedly and rushed to the kitchen, where Mrs. Collins was already preparing breakfast with tight-lipped efficiency. "Trouble's coming," the older woman said without preamble. "Tom Bradley's already gathering the hands." Outside, Eleanor could see the riders more clearly now. Sheriff Watson from Cedar Ridge, his deputy, and several men she recognized as Harrington's hired hands. Her heart sank. Jake appeared in the kitchen doorway, his gun belt already strapped on. "Eleanor, stay inside, no matter what happens. Jake, promise me." She nodded reluctantly, and he squeezed her shoulder before heading out to join Bradley and the other ranch hands. Through the window, Eleanor watched the confrontation unfold. Sheriff Watson, a decent man who'd known her father, looked uncomfortable as he spoke with Bradley. She couldn't hear the words, but saw Bradley's face darken, Jake's hand drift toward his gun. Then Watson produced a paper, official-looking, with seals. Bradley read it, his expression growing thunderous. Jake snatched the paper, read it, and Eleanor saw something she'd never seen on his face before: fear. The kitchen door burst open. Jake strode in, his face set in hard lines. "They're claiming I assaulted Harrington without provocation. Sheriff's got a warrant." He took Eleanor's hands. "It's a setup. Harrington's bought himself a trial. Probably bought the judge, too." "No." Eleanor pulled away, marching toward the door. "I'll tell them the truth. Tell them what he said." Jake caught her arm. "Your testimony won't matter. Not against a man like Harrington. Not with—" He touched her scarred cheek gently. "Not with how they see you." Mrs. Collins slammed a pot down hard. "This is wrong. Everyone saw what happened. Everyone saw what Harrington's money tells them they saw," Jake said bitterly. He turned back to Eleanor. "I have to go with them. If I resist, they'll have excuse to shoot me where I stand." Eleanor felt the world tilting. "There must be something—" "There is." Jake pulled her close, speaking urgently. You stay here. Stay safe. Bradley won't let anyone harm you. When this is over, you'll be in prison, or worse. Tears ran down her face. This is my fault. If I hadn't come here, if you hadn't defended me— Stop. He kissed her forehead. Only fault lies with Harrington. You remember that? Sheriff Watson appeared in the doorway, looking ashamed but determined. Time to go, Morrison. Jake released Eleanor and walked out with his head high. Through the window, she watched them shackle his hands, the metal bright in the morning sun. He looked back once, his eyes finding hers, and she saw his lips move. Be strong. Then they were gone, dust rising behind the horses, and Eleanor stood in the sudden silence, feeling as if her heart had been torn from her chest. We're not letting this happen. Mrs. Collins said firmly. Tom Bradley's already talking about hiring a lawyer from Denver. The hands are pooling money. It won't be enough. Eleanor wiped her tears, a strange calm settling over her. Not against Harrington's influence. She walked to her room, ignoring Mrs. Collins's calls. On her windowsill sat Jake's wooden flower, delicate petals carved with patient love. She picked it up, remembering his words. Finding one person who sees you true is worth more than 100 who only see what they expect. He'd seen her true, loved her despite the scar, the scandal, everything. And now he would pay for that love with his freedom, possibly his life. No, Eleanor had run once before, had let others decide her fate, define her worth. But that scared girl was gone, burned away like dross in a forge. What remained was stronger, tempered by Jake's love and her own growing courage. She changed into her riding clothes, split skirt and sturdy boots. From her small savings, she took every cent. Then she went to find Tom Bradley. I need a horse, she said, and directions to Judge Thornburg's house in Cedar Ridge. Bradley frowned. Eleanor, what are you planning? What I should have done from the beginning, fight back. An hour later, Eleanor stood before an imposing house on the best street in Cedar Ridge. Judge Thornburg's wife answered the door, her eyes widening at the sight of Eleanor's scar. I need to speak with the judge. Eleanor said, it's about the Morrison case. He's not, that is, he doesn't discuss cases. Then I'll wait. Eleanor pushed past the startled woman into the parlor. All day if necessary, all week, until he agrees to hear me. Judge Thornburg appeared within minutes. A thin man with shrewd eyes. Miss Thornton, you're creating quite a disturbance. No more than the disturbance of an innocent man being railroaded for defending a woman's honor. The judge's expression didn't change. The law doesn't recognize defending honor as justification for assault. The law should recognize truth over lies bought with Harrington money. That's a serious accusation. Eleanor stood, moving close enough that he had no choice but to see her scar clearly. This is what Harrington called disfigurement. This is what he said made me worthless. He stood in public and called me a whore, sir. Asked which cowboys I was spreading my legs for. Those were his exact words, spoken before witnesses. The judge shifted uncomfortably. Even if true, words don't justify. Don't they? Eleanor's voice rose. If someone spoke so of your wife, your daughter, would you stand idle? Or would you defend them as Jake Morrison defended me? The law? The law should protect the innocent, not the powerful. She pulled out her savings, setting the small leather pouch on his desk. This is everything I have. Not enough to buy justice, perhaps, but enough to show I'll give everything for the man who saw my worth when the world said I had none. Thornburg stared at the money, then at her. You love this cowboy? With all my heart. And if I don't help? If the trial goes forward as Harrington wishes? Eleanor straightened her spine. Then I'll stand outside this courthouse every day. I'll tell my story to anyone who'll listen. I'll make such noise that even Harrington's money won't silence it. The scarred bride cast aside will become the woman who wouldn't be silenced. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then Thornburg sighed. There may be another way. Harrington's pressing charges. But if he were to withdraw them— He won't. His pride? Pride can be negotiated. Everything can. For the right price. The judge pulled out paper, began writing. Take this to Harrington. It's a proposal. If he withdraws charges, you leave the territory, both you and Morrison. Tonight. Never to return. Eleanor's heart sank. Leave the rocking Jay, the only real home she'd found? But Jake's life was worth any sacrifice. I'll take it to him. She found Harrington at his ranch, Clarissa simpering at his side while he held court with business associates. His nose was still swollen from Jake's punch, giving him a piggish appearance that would have been funny in other circumstances. Come to beg? He asked when he saw her. Come to negotiate? She handed him the judge's letter. He read it, his eyebrows rising. Thornburg's gone soft, but the terms, yes, I could accept this. You and your savage gone forever, no longer polluting my territory with your presence. Then you'll withdraw the charges? Oh, yes, but I want one more thing. His smile was cruel. A public apology, from you, in front of the whole town, for the embarrassment you've caused me. Eleanor's hands clenched. Apologize to this monster. But Jake's face rose in her mind, and she nodded. When? Now, the town square's full of Saturday shoppers. Perfect audience. The ride to town was a blur. In the square. Harrington made a show of gathering attention, calling out to passers-by about the spectacle to come. Soon, a crowd gathered, curious and eager for drama. Good people of Cedar Ridge, Harrington announced. Miss Thornton has something to say. Eleanor stood before them all, the gossips, the judges, the few kind faces and many cruel ones. She thought of Jake in a cell, of love worth any humiliation. But as she opened her mouth, different words emerged than those Harrington expected. I stand here accused of causing embarrassment to Mr. Harrington, she said, her voice carrying clearly. But I ask you, who should be embarrassed? The woman who bears scars from saving horses from fire, or the man who abandoned her at the altar because those scars offended his vanity? The crowd stirred, murmuring. Harrington's face darkened. I'm not finished. Eleanor's voice grew stronger. You want apologies? Then I apologize to every woman here who's been told her worth lies only in her beauty. To every person judged not by their character but by their appearance. To everyone who's been cast aside because they didn't fit someone else's narrow definition of acceptable. Stop her, Harrington sputtered. But the crowd was listening now. Really listening. But most of all, Eleanor continued, I apologize to the man who sits in jail for defending me, who saw past scars to the woman beneath, who showed me that love isn't about perfection but about choosing each other despite imperfection. She turned to face Harrington directly. I'll leave your territory. Jake Morrison and I will go where hearts are judged by their kindness, not faces by their beauty. But know this, you're the one who should be ashamed, for in casting me aside, you revealed not my worthlessness but your own. The square erupted. Some jeered, but others, more than Eleanor expected, applauded. Martha Gibson was crying. Reverend Morrison stepped forward. I'll witness the withdrawal of charges, he said loudly, to ensure it's legal and binding. Harrington had no choice. With the crowd watching, with his own words about wanting them gone ringing in the air, he had to follow through or look weak. He signed the papers with vicious strokes. Within an hour, Jake was free. Eleanor met him at the jail, throwing herself into his arms as Sheriff Watson unlocked the cell. What did you do? Jake asked, holding her tight. What you taught me, she whispered, stood tall and told the truth. They left Cedar Ridge as the sun set, their few belongings packed on 2 horses. Tom Bradley had given them wages owed plus a bonus, and Mrs. Collins had wept while pressing a letter of recommendation into Eleanor's hands. As they rode south toward New Mexico territory, toward new possibilities, Jake reached over and took Eleanor's hand. Any regrets? He asked. Eleanor thought of all she was leaving, the known for the unknown, safety for adventure, solitude for love. None, she said. You? Only one. He smiled. That I didn't kiss you sooner that day at the festival. In front of them all. She laughed, the sound carrying across the prairie like music. There'll be other towns, other festivals, other chances to scandalize proper folk with how much I love you. Thousands. They rode on into the gathering darkness. Two souls scarred by life, but not defeated by it. Behind them, Cedar Ridge settled into its narrow judgments and small scandals. Ahead lay the vast frontier, where broken things could be made whole and cast-aside brides could find their worth in the arms of patient cowboys who saw them true. The stars emerged one by one, ancient witnesses to this newest chapter in the eternal story of love conquering fear. And somewhere in the Texas territory, a small ranch waited for a cook and a horse trainer, where no one would care about scars or scandal, only about the work of hands and the truth of hearts. The scarred bride had been cast aside, until a cowboy kissed her in front of them all. But that was only the beginning, the real story. Eleanor thought as Jake began to sing softly in the darkness, was what came after. The choice to love despite the cost, the courage to stand despite the fear, the joy of finding someone who saw you whole. That was the story worth telling, worth living, worth every mile of uncertain trail that lay ahead. Thank you all for listening to this tale from the Old West. I hope Eleanor and Jake's story touched your heart as it did mine. Where are you listening from today? Please share in the comments below. I'd love to know where in the world these frontier stories are reaching. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more tales of courage, love, and redemption from America's legendary past. What did you think of Eleanor's journey? Share your thoughts below.